Set to record, and we're on live.
Okay, let's call the City of Olivet Planning Community Design Commission for January 7th, 2021 to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Rob Jurgel,
Present.
Carol Wagner,
Present.
Jody Rich here, Richard Brophy,
Present.
Brian Lewis,
Present.
Mike Saunders,
Present.
and Tim Spiegelglass.
Present.
All right, let it also be known that also in attendance is City Council Liaison, Missy Waldman, Carlos Trejo, the Director of Planning and Community Development, Jonathan Roper, Planner GIS Coordinator, Barb Sondag, I see you're here, City Manager, thanks for coming, and Bridget Walter, Administrative Assistant. So, okay, well, thanks. First of all, I just want to say it's great to be back, guys. So thank you for everything and all your well wishes and everything. So it worked out great. And I do want to thank Carol for taking the reins and doing such a great job that she did. So a little bit of applause for her. It'd be great. Okay, so we'll want to just quickly discuss commission procedures and kind of go over it. We do not have any new business or old business on the agenda. So we'll be really just discussing, going through discussion items, which is great. I think we needed this. So it's almost like a good work session for us. We will also have public comments and we'll offer those in the beginning. And I will, if there's anybody who's in attendance, please, and you have a public comment that's not related to any of the discussion items, if you could please indicate that either by answering asking a question or raising your hand. What also really helps well is if you, on your name or your list of participants, if you can make sure that you put down your first name and your last name. So when we bring people in and out of the meetings, we know who we're bringing in and out. Okay, it just makes things go a lot smoother. Also, for any public comments, we do have to limit these to no more than 3 minutes, just to respect everybody, to get everybody's comments in, as well as respect everybody's time. So if you'd mind maintaining that, that would be fantastic. Okay, so Carlos, I think I'm just gonna ask to see if we have any public comments.
And Chairman, if there's, I do have 2 attendees noted. If there is anybody that would like to speak, please show your hand and I can transfer you over and there. And if I could just have a couple of minutes, Chairman, sometimes it depends on
No
the
worries.
speed.
Seeing none, I think we should go ahead and go on. And what we can also do
Okay.
is call for public comments at the end of the meeting too, just to make sure. So if anybody
All right.
does, if we do move on, if anybody does have any public comments, either jot them down, raise your hand, let us know somehow, and we'll make sure we get to that before we adjourn the meeting. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 4, which is discussion items. We'll go to item A, urban agriculture. Formerly it was known as quality of life items. And I think we're going to continue on with our discussions on that. Carlos?
Okay, Chairman, and I apologize. I mean, it was this afternoon that you were forwarded the most recent PDF with the proposed language for ordinance adoption. And the goal here is that since we don't have any items for action, that we can have just a general discussion and go through this section by section and edit as we speak, with the hopes that at our next commission meeting, we can have a final drafted ordinance prepared for consideration, hopefully action. The council would really like to get this for their discussion at a work session on February 2nd in there. So just a little bit of background, just to kind of describe what we're trying to do. The council has had a discussion amongst themselves, and it is there's a request of the council that policy-wise, they would like the Department of Planning and Community Development, which deals with zoning, building, and code enforcement, to begin to address issues and concerns regarding livestock, vegetation, and all that. Right now, it's a mixture of the various departments, including police. Um, and, with all recent events and as we have all, evolved in the process, the council finds that it would be best to have code enforcement officers or building inspectors, zoning administrators, address these type of issues when it comes down to chickens, bees, and then there was some other livestock and the vegetation issues they wanted to address. So it was the council that made the decision to, again, have the Department of Planning and Community Development kind of oversee the enforcement aspects of this as opposed to it becoming police issues. Police will continue to monitor and enforce any of the regulations regarding the animal code, which primarily addresses dogs, vicious dogs, and those things of that nature. But again, activities such as raising chickens and those concerns of neighbors regarding chickens, bees, and overplant vegetation would be handled by, I'm just going to call it my department. And we're fine with it. I think we have a better opportunity and an ability to engage with residents in a non-intimidating fashion or way for these things, and it allows the police to really focus on the more public safety type of issues. So the goal for me and overseeing the Department of Planning and Community Development is I needed some defined standards for the inspectors to have the confidence and the ability to enforce these regulations. Just right now the code says you can have chickens, and only if they're considered nuisances or do you get into violation. The goal here is that and this is again based on the council discussion, that if you're an Olivet resident and given the size and lot areas of our properties, we would allow up to 6 chickens. So we have now something measurable or numeric. And of course, their request was to prohibit roosters, which we'll go through that and incorporate it. They also wanted some conditions to allow people to raise bees on their property. And the reason for bees was that we had several existing properties that already conduct those operations. And the city is looking in itself, in its parks, to pursue this, raising bees as an opportunity. The other thing is we had some issues with some landscape gardenings that were getting pretty overwhelming. Some that were done in a very professional manner, others that were just, were not as well defined. And then we had an issue with bamboo in there and the invasiveness of bamboo. Unlike honeysuckle, which can just happen, from natural occurrences or even birds flying around and all that, bamboo is specifically planted. A person does it intentionally. It's not something that just happens by nature or the process of nature. Most of it, at least in Missouri, is that somebody deliberately plants it for a specific purpose. And we wanted, our findings over the past have been that it can become very invasive. It can impact properties. And again, it throws it into a property issue that, again, I think the code enforcement side is better to try to address and trying to put it in a public safety perspective. So we've been pretty supportive of it, subject to having well-defined parameters in place in there, and that's what we tried to prepare. So I'm going to go to the screen share and go to the memo that was distributed today, and kind of go. We've seen a majority of this already, and I do understand I still need to work on the definition sections, and I did promise that I would coordinate that with Mr. Brophy. At this time, I haven't coordinated or reached out to him, but I will do so. So please, I take it upon myself. I just haven't had a chance to talk to Richard on this yet. Okay, but we have a defined purpose and intent for the most part, and based on even when the city attorney had a discussion with the commission. Everybody's been pretty well satisfied with the contents under this section. If there are any issues, this is the time to know. But the purpose of intent pretty much identifies what the council recommended for the commission to put together. Recognize that there's a balance that's necessary for traditional agricultural activities. Establish defined parameters that are reflective of our residential values and characters. To minimize disruptions to adjacent properties. To develop access and resource for residents to be informed, and to provide an orderly exit strategy when some of these uses cease. And then there were two types, again, I classified them as livestock and horticulture that were identified by the council. One was, again, the chickens and the bees, and then the other was the overgrowth vegetation and purposeful type of plantings and restrictions on bamboo.
Carlos, I got a question real quick while you're going through this. Carlos?
Yes, I was waiting.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry,
No,
I'm
sorry.
looking.
Sorry,
I got
sorry,
two
sorry.
monitors here, one for the general and then one for, yes, sir.
And I know we're going to go through this, but we're going through the different things on the chickens and the beehives, but I didn't see anything on bamboo. So is bamboo just going to be, is there going to be some way of allowing bamboo under certain circumstances? or
Yes,
is it-
and we'll go through that in a second as we go through the next sections.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Sorry.
Carlos,
Okay.
um,
Yes, sir.
for number C, for letter C, I guess I'm curious, close proximity. I'm just wondering about the wording there only because things like bees, do we need to define close proximity? Because bees, for example, you know, it may not be close to someone else's property, but still could be a nuisance for somebody else. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a litigious thing or a challenge.
They will be defined either in the placement of the structure. You know, the hives will be noted how close they can be or what setbacks are required for those. And so they are defined for the structure, not necessarily in the purpose of the intent. And if it needs to be, if the wording there needs to be more general as opposed to being, if it's too specific, we can do that.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is somebody might, even if the beehive is still legal within proximity, like let's say it's 30 yards away from my property, but the bees are still swarming into my neighbors, you know, the yard. I just want to make sure maybe we cover in the bee area, but that if they're not properly maintained, regardless of close proximity, it's still an issue potentially. But just a thought.
And we could do and again, here we have an opportunity to edit. If it's just minimize disruptions to adjacent properties and not be as specific or too wordy.
Yeah, maybe that's the vagueness allows you some wiggle room. So.
There any other thoughts on that from other members?
No, I
One
think
thing,
it's a good
Carlos,
comment.
I'm
Go
sorry.
Go ahead.
You know, we could change that section C rather than saying to minimize disruptions to adjacent properties, just talk about the fact that we're interested in, how do I put this? I guess not focus on adjacent properties, but rather focus instead on the community at large. You know, to meet certain guidelines or to, to meet certain minimum standards for the community. That is similarly broad, but doesn't get into, you know, distances. Because frankly, even though I don't live next to someone, I don't want them having their entire yard turn into a swamp.
I can kind of get aboard with that.
And Carlos, I mean, I'm happy to workshop that language when we talk about the definitions, if that's useful, rather than take everybody's time. But
Okay. Right. And you had indicated again to meet certain standards for the
Yeah, I'm having a hard time coming up with it right now, but the concept of just creating a certain, making sure that the properties meet a certain minimum standard of beauty, quality. I don't know. That's the part I'm having a problem with. There's probably some select language we can come up with, but if the commission's okay with that general concept, that the purpose of this is just to maintain some certain minimum standards for the look and feel of our neighborhoods, we can probably come up with some more appropriate language that captures that concept.
Okay, we can come back on that if that's all right.
Yeah.
Sure. All right, I'll go ahead and move into the next section. And again, the goal in this process was to kind of back away from the full amount of language. The applications will have all the specific regulations, and to kind of go back to specifically what the council had. So under this section regarding livestock, by right, a lot zone single family residential would be allowed chickens and bees. It identifies that in chickens that it's limited to hens only and no more than 6 hens that are 18 weeks of age or older. And again, it says you can have bees, but you're limited to 3 hives. Now, going back to Brian's question, the standards for the setbacks, either for the coop or for the hives, will be identified in the accessory structure section of this code. So we already have dimensional regulations for chicken coops. Those were adopted a couple of years ago. We will put an additional accessory structure classification for hives and limit it to 20 cubic feet and not to exceed 5 feet in height.
Carlos, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is authorized by right for lot zone, single family residential? If we limit it to that, then that would limit or totally make, it couldn't happen. The idea that Parks is thinking about putting hives in somewhere. I mean, because that restricts only to residential property.
That's correct.
not
And
parks.
parks usually, as a PA activity district under different zoning, again, they're doing it for the purpose of, I guess, lack of a better word, recreation or services that they do, providing the community as a whole. They would not be subject to the 6 chickens.
I
in
don't
there.
think that really matters. I mean, if that's our intent, then I think we need to be specific about that, or just say for lot zone, single family residential or public activity.
We can take well, and that's something I'd be comfortable with. Now, the question I would look at it as, again, and this applies to playgrounds that are under our accessory structures ordinance. It's limited to residential zone districts. PA district, which is where our parks districts are not zoned residential. They're not classified as residential. They're not also classified as commercial. So they're kind of like this independent zoning in place. So when you look at the PA district and what it authorizes, I think that it's not subject to the accessory regulations for residential districts. It's a good question, but and something we can take a closer look, but I don't see them being tied together.
Okay, well, I kind of do. So I think it's worth exploring just to make sure.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it. But as we go through this, there is a process for some form of variation. And the justifications for that variation, and their justification could be that they're not zoned, residential. So there would be a process to consider them if they wanted to, even a process for, if looking at it broader. for a non-residential property or single-family residential property to be considered, but it has to go through a commission review.
Mhm.
So
I
I think it's a
didn't
good
want us
point,
to
but
get stuck.
there's a way to get it done, even under the way it's currently drafted, but we'll get to that in just a second. Any other thoughts? Now, there was talk about other, ordinances are what we consider organic. So they're constantly evolving and they cannot consider everything that's possible yesterday, today, and in the future. And, it's not uncommon that 6 months, 1 year, or 5 years to 10 years that we come back and we amend this ordinance because something became very common or the council was petitioned to consider changes to the city's policies or so. I added the site plan review procedure because there was a discussion about other types of livestock. Now, again, this section of the code is more about the action and the activity of livestock. It's not about pets. Pets are addressed in the animal code. But if somebody were to have a livestock that was less than 25 pounds, let's say a duck, a goose, that they could petition the commission for consideration. So there's still a process to provide an opportunity for things that are not enumerated in section 1 here, chickens and bees. Those are the ones that the council specifically requested. But those that we may have missed or that the council at this point didn't have any specific requests to consider.
Carlos, what about, I remember a constituent joined at one point and talked about her hens were not the normal size hens, they were the smaller, I forget the name. So are we getting into those details, or is that kind of what you're commenting on, that we can't classify every scenario here?
Correct. We'll have a process for variation we'll get to in a couple of from here. And then the third paragraph is specifically the council requests to prohibit roosters. And again, we'll talk about that, of those that are existing in there. And again, the variation process doesn't necessarily apply to roosters. So if somebody were to come in after this ordinance is adopted, roosters would be prohibited. For those that do have roosters, they will have an opportunity to petition. For those that do have roosters, at this moment, before this ordinance is adopted, they will have an opportunity to petition the commission to keep them.
Hey, Carlos, this is Mike. What's the issue with 18 weeks? Do we really care how old a rooster is once you're aware that a chicken's a rooster or a rooster?
Good question. At 18 weeks is when you can start determining the gender of the fowl, and when they become sexually active.
Interesting.
Things I never thought I would
Okay.
learn in this commission.
Yeah.
That's good.
So at that point, then the rooster is more common to crow, and hens are more common to start laying eggs.
Got it.
And then a lot of the times, and some of this is the informational material that will be provided as part of the application process. People will buy them as chicks, and at that point, you can't necessarily guarantee what the gender is at that time.
Carlos, I got a quick question. You guys might have covered this before, but what about horses, ponies, even the miniature horses, things like that? They're not rearing livestock. Where would they be covered?
And that's where based on the council's directive, that might be something we tackle down in the future. But I think the consensus I know the consensus from the council was just limit it to chicken to and bees. The commission had a little bit broader concern and wanted to catch a bit more. And I think the 25 pounds is reasonable. So if somebody wants to have a horse, I'm not sure, maybe 2 or 3 properties that really have enough ground to accommodate, you know, what would be necessary for a horse to have an open area. So you know,
No, I get it.
that's what I'd rather tackle when somebody comes in and says, well, what can I do? And it would be, well, let's see if we can amend the code.
Okay.
And I'm open for comment on this. I'm just saying that, you know, again, I don't want to open it up too much. I'd rather have it restrictive with the opportunity to open it than to open it up too much and not be able to go back.
I
So,
think you're
Carlos,
right. Go ahead.
I assume that you mean that would apply to cows or sheep or,
Yeah, it was not the council's
Goats.
intent to really get into the full-fledged of farming animals beyond the chickens and the bees. Now, the commission had a broader discussion. I think we talked about potbelly pigs, goats, llamas. I think I heard at one point in there, but I think we're trying to get back to the focus of the council. And again, to provide some opportunity for those things that we're not going to catch, but you know, those, you know, you can have a 75 or 100-pound dog. So what's the difference? It's, again, this is not about pets. It's about those that you're raising for a commodity, either because they're going to give eggs or cow maybe give milk. You know, so it's not like something you're going to bring in your house as you would bring in your dog or a ferret or something like that. This is to control more specifically livestock that's being used for some commodity function. Honey, eggs. Again, you could have a goat for milk, I guess.
Hey, Carlos, I just sent you some proposed, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just sent you some proposed language for that upper section. I don't know if maybe you want to bring it up and show everybody. Maybe we can check that box now.
Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to head to the yeah, I'm just going to bring it into that section, Mr. Brophy, if that's right. And I'll clear up the formatting afterwards. So give everybody an opportunity to kind of read it over.
Works for me.
Good for me too.
I think it's a nice job. Thanks, Rich. Carol, you good?
I'm good.
Any other comments or everybody all right?
I'm
I
good.
had an opportunity to look at that. So again, we'll have the livestock standards. I know there was still questions about, you know, this was an attempt to kind of balance the commission's thought of other animals and the minimize the number of animals from the council. I'll go into the horticulture again. These native gardens and prairies have become more popular, and I think from the city's goals, you know, we want to promote them as we're trying to address stormwater, as we're trying to address energy, sustainability, and those. But there has to be some defined standards in there that, you can't just do your whole yard without any consideration of the impact on adjacent properties or the neighborhood as a whole. Native gardens and prairies should have a defined perimeter or edge. They should be set back from an adjacent property line, not planted all the way up to a property line. They should not encroach into a street right away. And they should, again, we're asking that residents by right should be able to do 50% of their front yard or 50% of their rear yard. Those that want to exceed those standards or find that they want to go beyond those standards noted above, they would have an opportunity to come to the commission for site plan review. And then finally, we would prohibit bamboo.
Carlos, I assume I wonder if it's worth connecting with the Deer Creek Watershed Group just to get their thoughts on the language. The only thing I'm worried about is, and I like the language, is the definition, I guess, of, natural garden or native garden. I assume, it's just dumb, but grass doesn't count, but different types of grass. But, is it one person's definition of a native garden different than another's, or, but again, I don't think you can get too specific, but I wonder if it's worth talking to the Deer Creek to see if they would have any concerns over this.
We can check.
Hey, Carlos, this is,
Carlos?
go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. Thanks, Mike. I'm somewhere we need to clarify, I think, and maybe I'm a little confused, but I'm not sure why yards with native plantings are subject to different rules than yards that have non-native plantings. If I covered my lot with, bushes that are non-native and grasses that are non-native, why are we saying that how that lot behaves can be different than one that has native plants?
Isn't it related to how it's maintained?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Are we really not talking about how we maintain our yard areas, period? What difference does it make if the plants are native or non-native? Native plants have deeper roots, therefore they suck up more stormwater, which in all of that is a huge deal. But if we're talking about problems with yards that are, shall we say, overgrown, for lack of a better term, wouldn't we have the same problem if they were not native vegetation, but something else, but they're just also overgrown? So why are we making the differentiation in the first place? If our standards for yard maintenance are sufficient, they should apply no matter what.
Right now, the current standards limit a lot of the natives, because they're kind of grassy things, to 7 inches. The code hasn't considered, or doesn't consider landscaping, like somebody putting arborvitae or ivy as weeds, as all of that. But it does
Well,
consider.
wouldn't it make more sense then to just fix our lawn maintenance code rather than making up a whole nother code?
Well, it still would be applied either way. It's just under the sections that it would be. That's why we're having this discussion. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer.
Yeah,
for you.
it seems to me if we're trying to keep them orderly, if we're talking about private residential lawn maintenance, it should be in one place.
Well, I guess the only thing I'll add to that is, you know, with lawns, that covers pretty much, most of the property, besides where the buildings are, where there's other bushes and plants. These are typically other, I guess, smaller segments that could grow larger in size or change, as well.
No, I think that could be true for any plants.
Well,
So you're not saying specifically, so help me understand, Carol, that there was about gardens and prairies, and your issue is just not the sole word of having native on there.
No, my issue is that that's part of it, but if we have a code that says you need to maintain your lawn to these standards, okay? What difference does it make whether the vegetation that we're saying has to meet these standards is native or not? Or what if they're cultivars? I mean, you could begin to argue the point. I'm just trying to, I understand that our maintenance code doesn't deal with this, but maybe it should rather than reinventing the whole wheel. I mean, why have property maintenance code under this and then under this? It depends on what the specific plant is. Doesn't make any sense to me. And my yard's going to have some native and some non-native.
but is it a prairie?
No, but I guess you could define it any way you want. It's a big yard.
Right, but I guess when I see prairies, we're looking at, taller grasses that are allowed to kind of grow in a manner that's undefined, so to speak. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but
I could do that to my yard, be less maintenance.
I guess that's the thing that I'm noodling over, is what we're really talking about is any grass or plant that is left unchecked, that you're not mowing or clipping routinely. Whether it's, Carol, I take your point, whether it comes from Missouri or Florida is almost irrelevant.
Right, it's how
we're going to allow
looks
a patch to grow unchecked. How much are you allowed to let grow unchecked? And what's it got to look like? If I would have kudzu growing in my yard in a defined space, could I do it? And is that what we want from a community perspective?
right. I mean, it's either maintained to a certain standard or it's not. Whether or not the plant is native or not, to me, is irrelevant.
Here's
I mean, I could see where we might want a provision for no bamboo, but we don't have to create a whole ordinance on a separate ordinance on native gardening if we have an ordinance on how we should maintain our lawns anyway. If we need to modify that to incorporate native plants, then maybe that's where we should focus.
If I may ask the question on this, similar to what Mr. Trejo mentioned with the distinguishing between a native grass that should go over 7 inches and a traditional lawn, it's sounding like this might be switched from just native plants to maybe a segment of taller grasses, because, understandably, and if you're looking at a front yard, you have a lawn, you have bushes that might even exceed 6 feet tall that are still nicely trimmed. You might have trees, but you usually don't see grasses that exceed a certain height. And if you do, it's not and what I guess part of this ordinance is trying to prevent is the whole front yard to have, 10-foot just grasses. And that's where maybe part of this should more or less focus on maybe just the taller grasses. Um, and just redefining that segment of it.
I've heard that, or I've just looked up and saw a term that says prairie style gardens. Is that a good?
I don't know what that means.
I don't either. I'm not a horticulturalist.
I think it's exactly what we're talking about.
The objective here is specifically the activity that somebody undertakes to do, to do these. What we received are, and what has become more difficult as it's become more popular, is we've had property owners object to code enforcement by indicating that they were trying to, create a native garden, is a term usually that's generally used, or a prairie, or revert to a prairie. And that, like you said, under the existing property maintenance code, which is in the building code, it really didn't have the effective teeth to make that distinction in here. So we're utilizing it more from a zoning perspective. And a lot of this, again, my intent was to bring it into zoning because there's more of an opportunity for your input and public input as opposed to anything outside of the zoning code. The council just has to draft up an ordinance. So here is an opportunity again to engage with the 7 commissioners, to provide opportunities for public comments, and then we'll talk about hosting a plan commission public hearing regarding before we take action. Now, the council could do that, but that would be up to them. Under an amendment through the zoning code, it's required. So I agree, we could look at this section and put it into maybe chapter 500, which again goes about building and property maintenance. Or there are other sections in the code that talk about public, other public type of regulations in there, but then we kind of lose, I lose the commission input in that process. Now, we've already gotten a good step into this, so I know what, we've gotten really good feedback from the commission members as we can take a look at that.
It just seems to me that it's property maintenance that we're concerned about here, and that belongs with property maintenance. I mean, we're the planning commission, so we're not really concerned about
It's an
maintenance.
aesthetic. It's an aesthetic look
that's a
too.
definition.
It's an aesthetic. I disagree with that. I understand what you're saying, but I disagree with that.
It just seems to me that maintenance, property maintenance should be in one place in the code. Not some here and some there.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't object to it. Is that something the commission would prefer to consider it to change it over the code? From my end, I've gotten your input and perspective on this. I still support it being part of the zoning code. Gives an opportunity for these variations. We'll go over in a second. And the process, but I do agree with you. It's this is one of these evolving things that 2 years ago we rarely dealt with. This past summer, whether it was COVID or not, we had constant calls and concerns expressed.
What do you all think? Am I the only one who feels?
Yeah, I think I've voiced my thoughts. Anybody else?
I think I tend to agree that I'm not sure why we would delineate between native or not. And just to me, I think we're basically saying that any non-grass vegetation, whether it's prairie, whether it's, tall grass, whether it's bushes, we don't want it to be more than 50% is what I'm hearing. Is that fair?
Correct.
So I'm wondering if it just is more generic to say non-grass vegetation intentionally planted. I don't know, Carol, if that addresses what you're talking about.
I think so, partly. It just seems to me that if we've got an ordinance on how we should maintain our yards and property maintenance, that whether it's native or non-native plantings, it should fall under the same parts of the code. And if we need to adjust the existing code, then we may need to do that. I mean, I know in my own yard, I've got native and non-native.
And
So
regardless of
are we gonna
native,
say, so I could have some plants that are this because they're not native and other plants that can only be this because they are, I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
If we can step away from native and not for a moment, I guess in my mind, what we're really talking about, I like this notion of prairie style grasses. It seems like that's what we're really talking about. We don't want jungle to be grown. We're really talking about prairies, whether they're native prairies or not. I think that conjures the right image for everybody. And it seems like what we don't want is people just letting their yards grow unkept.
right.
Even 50% of them we don't want grown unkept. We're really talking about whether we're allowing prairie gardens and how much and when. So I like the idea of focusing on just prairie. Otherwise, it seems like it's an impossible task. Let's just talk about whether, the default state is you're mowing your lawn, you've got typical hedges and trees. If you want to introduce a prairie type garden, here's the way in which you can do it and the degree to which you can do it. Maybe we just need to
So how
focus
would
on
you-
that. And yeah.
How would you define what a prairie is?
I don't know that we need to, because I guess what I would say is it conjures an image in my mind. Grasses and other wildflowers that are growing roughly 3 to 5 feet in height, no weeds, whatever that means. But I guess my point is we can refer to prairies, and I think it will conjure in people's minds the right kind of image anyway. I don't know that we're going to be able to define it because it seems like we'll be here for months trying to come up with language that captures this when really maybe we don't need to. We can just say this relates to prairie gardens only. You can only have 50% of your property have a prairie garden, and it must be, conducted in the following ways, period. And then it's open to perhaps some interpretation as to what a prairie garden is, but I think we all know in our minds, if not with words.
So the area around Danforth is left native. And
Right.
would we say that, would we call that a prairie?
Yes.
And if so, would that be an acceptable thing in all of that or not?
I think that's what, it's funny because Danforth is the exact thing that pops into my mind. I mean, I think that is a typical native prairie garden. So that's the question is, do we want that and how much of it? That's the question that I've had in my mind that we've been grappling with.
Because it's 100% and they're of their front on Olive, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking that was going to be my question, is 50% too much? That seems like a lot of a front yard to have that in there.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I agree also. And I think we also should introduce side yards. We have a lot of very unique lots in Olivet. So I would, whether we need to, also introduce side yards. So.
Are there so many, Carlos, maybe you can speak to this. Are there this seems like a fairly limited issue, as in, you know, when I walk around all of that, I could maybe count on one hand the prairie gardens that I'm aware of. Is this a more pervasive issue than I'm thinking it is? And the reason I ask this question is perhaps we limit it to 10% and just say, if you want more, you're gonna have to petition.
Seeing a lot more rain
I'd like
gardens.
It's become more common in the past couple of years as opposed to what we've had to address previously. We've also received more challenges to the interpretation of what's existing within the, you know, the current codes as it being non-specific. And then, you know, so in terms of, it has been common, more common. I have probably this summer, we dealt with 3 to 4 where somebody did, you know, a full yard, and each in a varying scale. Some that were worthy to go visit and take a look at, to some that, oh no, you know, it just, the intent is good or so, but you know, either the character of the area was just not conducive for someone to do that, or the full yard of it, or it, you know, they understand it, but they had familiarity with it, but didn't understand the whole concept of it. And again, that's a subjective opinion from my end. You know,
What if we were to just, what if we were to just nix the front and rear issue altogether and just say, you know, you can only have 25% of your yard covered with it?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. A percent, just, you know.
So are we saying 25% can be prairie or 25% can be native gardens?
My proposal is we focus on
Past that,
prairie
it's
style.
prairie.
Okay,
I think you've got a consensus of the native gardens, just
okay.
So the only other thing I worry about is 25% of the yard. That means in the front of my yard, I could basically put the whole entire native garden in front of my yard. I'm not sure if that's really what we want to portray in this.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
You want it to be smaller? I mean, make it 10%?
How about we just do 25% in the front, sides, and rear yard areas?
What if, another thought would be 25% of the lot yard area with no more than 10% in the front and side yards?
I like that a lot.
I like that.
Yeah.
you just said front and rear yard, right?
In side yard. I guess my thought was, you know, people should have more right to do what they want with their backyard. It's less visible normally.
Good point. And doesn't impact the adjacent neighbors.
Right. As much.
Right.
Now, again, there's still the opportunity for a property owner to petition to exceed those standards, but they
Right.
would have to come in site plan review.
Right.
Any other? Now, the next section, we'll get into the variations and existing activities, the grandfathering component. So again, we have identified, you know, the livestock as it's authorized, as it's subject to review and it's prohibited. Horticulture as it's authorized, as it's subject to review and prohibited. to variations. Now on variations, what I've done, again, instead of trying to rewrite the wheel, is went back to current variation processes that are already identified in our code. We have several that the commission has authority to. In chapter 400, we have it for parking. In chapter 435, which I believe is the fence code, we have it for fences. And under chapter 428, we have it for community design review for the Olive Boulevard corridor. So this was utilizing some of that existing language that's in the code, but making some changes in there. So again, somebody could petition the commission for a change into the requirements regarding the number of livestock. Wanted just to make that clear. It's just about the number that's identified by the code, and the commission may consider, given the size of the lot, the topography, or the shielding from adjacent properties, that you may provide some relief to their request.
Carlos, how will the existing bamboo in Olivet be handled?
That will be handled in paragraph 2. So anything that's existing, whether livestock or horticulture activities, we will, the city will follow through with a notification and request that they apply to the commission within 90 days from the adoption of the ordinance to request continued activity. And at that point, the commission can authorize that they continue, subject to some alterations, or that they need to cease.
Good.
What you cannot vary, or what the intent here, what the commission cannot vary, is anything that the council's requested to be prohibited. If somebody wanted to do that or exceed some of the standards identified here, they become more, board of zoning adjustment issues that would be.
Does that mean that somebody who has bamboo currently, even if they have a little, they could try to petition, but we're going to say no because it's prohibited?
No. The commission can consider it for continued, whether it's livestock or existing livestock or horticulture activities that would be prohibited. Continue as is, continue subject to modifications, or cease.
Are we? Well, it does. No, that makes sense. But I guess I'm wondering if we're setting ourselves up for. I guess I don't know how many people will actually petition, but are we setting ourselves up for hundreds of potential things coming before the commission?
We've gone out, and I've had the inspectors kind of inventory locations and all that, because we are going to send out notifications for people to be informed of what these regulations would be in that, and have an opportunity to comment on these things too. But it's I have more livestock than I have bamboo. Bamboo, I probably have about half a dozen. Livestock, I probably have a little bit more, between half a dozen to a dozen of active, that are active at currently. Some of them that are in backyards are really hard to find, depending on the location and the property type. So that being said, within those 90 days, no, I don't anticipate that there would be this rush. Some people will have to make decisions. Part of the purpose of this ordinance is that we have already existing frictions in some other properties regarding this, and this ordinance will help us put some parameters in place. But yeah, I anticipate within those 90 days, there's a possibility that you could see 12 petitions.
Hey, Carlos, I'm speaking as someone who does have bamboo in their backyard, a very small amount of it. I think I have for like 2 decades, but what are the criterion? And I'll preface this by saying I couldn't care less about removing it or keeping it, but what are the criterion by which we're going to evaluate those bamboo petitions? Because, some people do want it, and let's say the neighbor doesn't. how are we going to decide whether they get to keep it or not? And how is that not going to be putting one neighbor's
Understand.
preference against another?
Well, there's no way not to control that aspect of it, but site plan review has parameters for the commission to consider both what are the impacts internally on the lot and those adjacent to the lot. So, and the whole focus on health, safety, and welfare. But I envision that if somebody has bamboo and they have it planted for an identified reason, a majority of the time it's for screening, for native type of screening purposes, as opposed to putting up a fence.
Non-native screening.
They're trying to
Sorry.
address a topography issue, again, which could be associated with what they're trying to screen or so. And finally, is that they have the proper barriers in place to control the spread. Bamboo is a very invasive species, and it has the potential to cause havoc, not just on your property, which we want to try to educate and protect a property owner, but spread into other people's property who may or may not have wanted bamboo as part of their yard area.
How difficult is it to remove bamboo?
It's difficult. It's not a simple task.
The reason is, I'll speak to this from experience, not only do you have to cut down the top, but they have these things called rhizomes, which run horizontally just under the surface. And you got to like kill them. You have to chop them in the ground. You can cut down a whole thing of bamboo and next year it'll grow back up again from those rhizomes.
That's what I'm afraid is going to be happening.
Yeah.
And it is possible.
So I could grow bamboo in a flower pot because I control its spread, but I can't grow it in the yard unless I have controls in the earth, like metal plates that stop the rhizomes.
Right.
Just searching for clarification.
Mhm.
Come.
Well, again, it's not necessarily about the visual appearance of it. It is a very invasive species. It's like trying to purposely planting honeysuckle on your property at the edge of your property is going to spread.
Should we state that in the beginning of our ordinance? Because bamboo is so invasive? I mean, so that it's clear as to
Why?
why it's a problem?
The invasive nature of bamboo.
Mhm.
I think that's a great idea.
I mean, I kind of think that's what, given like the Commissioner Brophy's revision here on the item C here about that.
But maybe
Is
where
your
you
preference to have
prohibit it.
something a little bit more specific to just purposely or just kind of say bamboo.
How about in the
Right,
section where
because
it's prohibited?
Right.
Explain
That's kind of what I was
why.
thinking.
I'll go back down. Sorry if I
Yeah, like bamboo because it is so. Somebody could come up with a cultivar of bamboo that is not so invasive.
But is it a requirement for a code? Going back to your original argument, is it something that's necessarily needed to be stated in a code?
I think it might help
I
explain
think
why.
it would help clarify it. I mean, I don't know that it's just kind of out there. Yeah. Like, I mean, if somebody doesn't know anything about bamboo, they're gonna wonder about the arbitrariness of our code unless we say it's clear. Well, there's a
For what it's
problem.
worth, I'm sorry, Carol. But for what it's worth, usually in a statute or a code, you don't provide an articulation of why it's there. There will be like administrative comments at the bottom.
Mhm.
It'd be unusual for us. I don't disagree that it's nice to provide that kind of detail, but it would be unusual for us to start providing those kinds of comments in a code section. Just for what that's worth, it would be atypical.
And that's,
I,
I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. I don't know how to say, you know, and we can come up with language. I just don't know if it's, you know, for the purposes of it to be codified as part of the code, that the explanation is in there. Because it's not part of what we would be enforcing. It's just explaining why we're enforcing it, which I understand, but that's what the purpose and intent is for.
okay, I kind of think it helps to clarify it, but that's,
But even, let's say, like, if you look at the permitted land uses in the COR district,
mhm.
or even in the current ordinance, it says that we prohibit tattoo parlors. That's all it says. Tattoo parlors are prohibited,
Mhm.
but we don't go into
But they're defined somewhere, aren't they?
that tattoo is about, you know, ink being put on the body here.
Right, so do we have a definition of bamboo somewhere?
No,
No, that's,
but now you're saying to define bamboo, but you're also asking, define it and then say why we don't like it.
no, I'm thinking if we had a separate, it's not worth debating, but I'm just
Mhm.
thinking
No.
if we had a separate section where we defined terms, we could say bamboo, the invasive species,
Mhm.
but we don't do that. So I'm just thinking it would help clarify. We said why, but especially since it's the only thing.
Now, there is a definition section that would be provided here. And is that something, you know, if you would want, again.
So
just
maybe it would be
define-
more appropriate to say something in a definition section.
So we can look into that.
I think it'd be more appropriate if it's in the purpose and intent, but we could look at, crafting some language and explain the issue that you want to prevent the invasive nature of plants that are difficult to control. You can put parentheses, i.e. bamboo, it's to minimize impact to adjacent neighbors. And I'll write that up.
Sounds great. No, I think that would balance it if it
It'll
was.
work.
Okay. So again, I know, you just received it and we kind of played around today, actively trying to draft this up at the same time. But the goal here was, again, we will have, the final draft prepared and ready for you at the next meeting. There is another this is the code portion. Then there's a section of the applications. Those are attached or were attached in your email today. Those become a little bit more flexible. The code has to go through a process for adoption, and that same process has to be followed for any amendments. The applications would be similar to how we've done our residential redevelopment guidelines. Either the commission or the council at time to time has the opportunity to go to the application, make changes, they're subject to their approval in there. So it's not staff that can just automatically change something on the application. It would be subject to go through a process. So take a look at those. And those is where we get into a lot of the more specifics about that. So there's really just an application for bees, application for chickens, application for bees. And then we can put together an application for the horticulture. I just assumed that they would apply for the special permit. So there was nothing unique or another sheet that had to be created in there, but we can take a look at that too.
I have a few quick comments on some of those. I mean, if you want to go through those now, I'm not sure if that's what you're planning on doing. It's already
No, we
8:15. I'm not sure if we're.
Let me get to the view for the one page here. That's going to be too small. Okay, go ahead. Which page are you talking about, Chairman?
It's on page 6 of 13.
Okay, this would be the proposed information handout and application raising chickens.
Application for for rearing chickens. So it keep scrolling down, actually, I believe. This.
Oh, okay.
So if you see the bulleted item, no chicken shall be permitted to run at large. It's the second sub bullet that says the chicken shall be deemed to be permitted to run at large. I just think maybe you need to scratch out to be permitted in that second.
I think this was brought up before, and I apologize if I.
No worries.
I'll take that apology. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you, Councilman.
The only other kind of concern that I have with some of these, and I haven't gone through it in a lot of detail, but there was, in terms of the bees, I've been seeing beehives, body frames,
Beers.
yeah, and I'm just, it seems like we're using those kind of interchangeably, and I'm just not sure. I might not just understand this enough.
So we'll take a look at that and just be a little bit more consistent on
Right.
how we're using those terms.
And I had a quick question. It says not to exceed 8 feet in height. That seems pretty tall.
Yeah, and I think at the last meeting, there was and that might have been just something that was not changed over, that there was a consensus to limit it at 5 feet.
Yeah, I get on board with that.
Bear with me, I'm gonna page up to another section. So I apologize if it's anybody nauseated. Yeah, so this was the consensus from the commission from previous meetings, was 20 cubic feet and 5 feet in height would be the maximum.
Good.
So the application itself hadn't been changed to reflect that. So my apologies.
No worries.
Carlos, did we ever get an answer back from the city attorney about what if a neighbor becomes highly allergic? Someone who's keeping
Not
hives?
beyond that, but I do want to talk about the next scheduled meeting and then having him also in here, because there's some other changes he's looking at, part of the accessory code at the same time.
Okay.
So I know he did take a look at that item, and I'm going to ask Mr. Roper if you're on.
Yes, sir.
I know he had you had exchanged emails with him, but I think it was he was just looking for clarification of the community you had solved. I don't know if there was anything beyond that or not, or I didn't see anything.
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
We'll follow up. Carol. All right. Anything else?
Nothing here.
Nothing for me.
And again, I'll coordinate with you, Mr. Commissioner Brophy, and see if we can go over the the definitions,
Sure.
if you have opportunity in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll get this final draft to the commission next Friday, prior to the next scheduled meeting. One of the things, and I guess we can go ahead and talk about it now, is our next scheduled meeting, and this is probably enough. Is Thursday, January 21. We are going to have a busy action item agenda that I am concerned that either we're not going to be able to focus all on the action items, or we're not going to be able to focus all on these discussions items. So I would like to inquire if commissioners would be willing to have a second meeting, or what would be a third meeting this month, and host a meeting on January 28th to consider the text amendments and have the kind of like a public hearing regarding the changes that would be recommended to council.
I don't have an objection.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carlos, if I could just have clarity, that's not for, are you saying a public meeting on this at Planning and Zoning on January 28th? That would result in a, okay, I just need clarification. That was all, sir. Thank you.
Well, in council liaison, just to make sure, because all the meetings are public meetings, and the commission allows in public comments in all the meetings, but we would have an opportunity specifically to hear public comments regarding the draft ordinance, and those, especially those that would be impacted by conditions within this ordinance, to give them an opportunity to voice their sentiments to the commission. Now, the city council themselves will host a public hearing prior to adoption to any of these amendments. Now, and of course, and the goal is to get the draft to the council for their work session on February 2nd. So we would stay within that schedule.
But Carlos, if we have public comments for us, there's potentially going to be changes. We're not going to be able to then get it to the council.
Well, I think it gives an opportunity, again, that would impact your recommendation to the council, or things that the council should consider as part of this.
No, I understand.
I would rather hear the comments earlier on than at the point that we have the city council's public hearing. But
Commission Chairman, I agree with Mr. Trejo, and I was just asking the question for clarification. It does make sense, and maybe it's something minor that you go ahead and make an implementation of a suggestion that evening before you make your recommendation to us. So again, mine was just for a matter of clarification of understanding what I heard. That was all.
Let me just throw out something to discuss. If we made this more of a priority on the meeting before, on the 21st, and then had another meeting to go over new business items or things like that, then we would make sure that if we had the discussions on the 21st, if there were any changes, we could then get that approved before the 28th meeting, and then get it to the council on the 3rd as a final product.
Would you then, so you would then allow that public input at your next meeting so that there is some input? Is that not correct, Mr.
Yeah.
Trejo?
mm-hmm.
Carlos, I'm wondering if we could do that and just start our meeting earlier, like start at 6 or 6:30, so we wouldn't end up going quite so late.
We could consider that. It's difficult to change the action, the consideration of the action items, because those are pretty well posted, and petitioners, while they should not count on action will be taken on that specific night. It's more difficult to try to reschedule them or delay them in the process. If the commission's willing to start the meeting earlier for that consideration, that works for our end. We have an opportunity the following week to make any amendments. And if there are comments that come through, yeah, I'm fine with that. That's another alternative or option.
I'm available
Denise?
if we want to start early too.
Would be an
I'm
earlier meeting.
for an earlier meeting, if need be. I'm not sure about the other commission members.
Maybe a half hour earlier, but I'd prefer not to do too much earlier because otherwise I lose time with the family.
I just wonder
Now,
how long the public comments might take.
That's where it's always hard to gauge. I don't know. I know from the agenda side, we have, I think, 2 or 3 kind of items that need to be brought to the commission because it's required by code, but not necessarily any objections from the staff. Jonathan, on the new homes, how many do you anticipate?
I believe we'll have 2 possibly new homes. Just a quick solar panel review for one property, a patio at a commercial property. So probably 4 petitions at this point, I'm thinking. Well, 2 petitions and 2 petitions for more consideration, and then the other 2 I think would more be just bringing to the commission's attention. So
then we will have a rezoning request that will be introduced that night for redevelopment at Hilltop and, Irvington and Rhyme, right behind the CVS, and Chevy's for a multifamily development. That night, we will introduce the petitioners, give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and go over their project. They are looking for a MU Gateway rezoning to develop a PDD. So this will be their first, I think it's called the conceptual review meeting. So as a courtesy, they'll present themselves in the project to the commission and open for comments. That being said, this is to get it introduced to you, but I anticipate that there will be some public or neighboring comments or that would accompany that. It's hard to fathom that there wouldn't. No action will be requested that night on that item, but it starts the process.
I don't think we're going to be able to do public hearings and these
Yeah.
other items on the 21st then. I think we're going to have the 28th meeting. And then we'll just have to see what happens with the comments and go from there.
The other thing, Chairman, and all these things are always flexible. So the council wants to address the core of this ordinance at its work session on February 2nd. So if the commission meets on the 21st or even meets on the 28th, it's to have what would be the final draft with suggested whether there would be changes or not. The council is going to just have a work session discussion on the 2nd with the goal to consider it at their February 9th meeting. The commission will still have one more meeting before February 9th if there are final saying, if you want to dot the I's, cross the T's type of changes at that, you
Good,
still
good.
have one more opportunity.
Okay, Good. That makes sense.
Is that okay? Or, I mean, I know that's
Yes,
not what
it
you're.
is. I mean, ideally, we'd want to send it to council with everything kind of finalized, but under these circumstances, I understand. Okay, that being said, can we move on to discussion item B? Stormwater management. It's a
Mr.
discussion.
Roper, I have your memo and I'm going to go ahead and post it if that's okay. You should be able to. Where's my sharing? Screen share. Okay, and Mr. Roper, I believe you can go through that or through the controls.
Is Jonathan muted?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
got his.
I'm sorry. How do I request the control?
I thought it was set already. Surround. Okay, so he's got.
Yeah, I'm not doing anything.
Okay, bear with me 1 second, sir.
Okay.
Oh, you got it?
No, I don't. Or do you want me to share mine?
Yeah, if you have yours, then that'll be fine.
Okay, great.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop share on my end.
Okay. I'm gonna do kind of what Carlos did because I think the Word document actually helped pretty well to assist in this process. So is that fine for everyone to see that on the screen? The document?
Sure.
Okay. So the city of Olivet in the past, in 2020, has really looked at stormwater issues and stormwater management within the city of Olivet, which included identifying 7 different areas to look at, being construction, vegetation, and pervious spaces, infrastructure, soils, topology, and weather. Staff also discussed a few of our policies related to the stream buffer and also floodplain regulations as well. The next step we're looking at is to create a roadmap for the future stormwater management and all of that. As there are different land use activities that are foreseeable for the future with new construction, loss of canopy, larger footprints, and more runoff. This plan looks to right now looking at 6 principles that are very flexible, and this is the first concept bringing to the commission this evening. And these items here really just are items that either it would guide the commission and the city and staff with what resources we need to do and look at and how we go about prioritizing and addressing those. So the 5 principles we'll get into a little bit in a moment, but it's really about identifying the issues, concerns, also just how stormwater travels on a site currently and how that just flows throughout all of that. Our response to that. So, what are the solutions for a lot of the either issues or concerns that are out there? How do we manage stormwater? How do we need to maintain a resource guide for in-house and also the public's use on different solutions that are come up with. We will need to provide different cost estimates for different projects and solutions in the future. Some of these cost a lot more than others, and it's just good to gauge, if you talk to a resident, how much one would cost more than another. This also established a matrix for projects that based upon this or that criteria, we would maybe prioritize other projects or even look at funding in different times. So you might have one project and a funding match component. So there's a matrix that looks at that. And again, I mentioned the funding sources here. And for tonight, I'm just going to go through each one of these 6 in just more detail for now, and just kind of the thought behind it. So identify stormwater management issues through the city of Olivet. So, identifying the stormwater patterns on the neighborhood level, and also on the sub watershed level. So on a neighborhood level, or the sub watershed level being the the low points that we have seen. Also identifying the stormwater issues facing residents and businesses. So sometimes, these two levels are more on the city level, if you were, or the larger scale. Some of these other ones, like residential, many people do have stormwater issues, and it's not really I should say, city issue. A lot of times it's just a lot by lot items, but there are solutions that the city can look at to help. Stormwater facing businesses, and this could also mean, whether it is the regulations that are being placed on them or actual stormwater issues. We also have to identify the stormwater management issues and directives for other jurisdictions. So we have like FEMA and SEMA. There's a select amount of properties that also are regulated with floodplains. There are the MSD standards for post-construction best management practices. So we go into, there are directives for these, but our current standards might just say, do it in line with MSD. But as a design commission, we have seen different properties. I'm just going to name like a Quick Trip, for example, gas station. They have the really big depression when you enter, and they have like an orange rock. That's their stormwater BMP that complies to MSD. However, with that would not comply with the standards of Chapter 428 community design. So with some of these, we're looking at identifying what this is about stormwater management as a whole. So that's why we mentioned MSD and that as well. The stream buffer component currently through the USGS or through whoever, we have the stream buffer requirement. So that's identifying the issues of what, or not only the issue, but just the stormwater management directives for what that they're supposed to achieve. And that would most likely going with the respond with stormwater solutions to the various to the variety of land improvements and alterations. We look for, from the identification of stormwater management to the solutions that we're going to look for. So provide solutions, for the common items being permitted through all of that. There are always new off-street parking areas either being widened or created, and that over time does impact land use. I would say one of the most, because you have, you might have a lot of new house construction south of Olive, which might, have these, sump pumps and downspouts become, and new larger impervious footprints become more of an issue. But you also look at the land use changes that are happening everywhere in all of that, like the off-street parking areas that happens anywhere, impervious, additions. Look at the or patios. You look at the larger basements and the impact on stormwater or in-ground pools. We also look at the changes with drainage patterns for infrastructure. So we have different properties that water is collected via an inlet and is poured onto someone's property until it reaches the low point. Or there are a lot of connections of the disconnected sewer discharge pipes to look at, where two pipes just don't match, or they're just so far away that water is running over residential property neighborhood before it picks up into like an MSD approved inlet. So what are the solutions for those, which either might be piping or bioswales, just manage the water via plants and on the surface. Also looking at area inlets where there are different properties that have an area inlet, and how to manage those in a way that it might, some of the inlets are very dilapidated in either the street or the erosion nearby, or they're even an eyesore in some cases. So what to do about those? Code modifications. We have Chapter 420 stream buffer protection regulations. The plan would really look to modify and enhance all these to how we would want to see development in the future regarding these chapters. Stewardship is also you have the maintenance responsibility for some of these, who would be responsible, the expectations of the upkeep. So on some of these, some of these issues exist today, but if there were to be something improved, especially on private property, all of that, we're probably not the ones who really want to go out to cut down your vegetation or your prairie grasses we just talked about. This is also to have some private responsibility involved as well, but really understanding that. Also the maintenance you can look under as well, I'll actually go back to the maintenance and the costs and in the cost section. So are there any questions so far? Should I just keep rolling through? We have about a few more of these.
I think keep going through. I think it's good.
Maintain a stormwater management resource for public and private use. So this one is just really having the information available to the residents, any businesses, in a really concise manner that really aids them in their quest for either a new addition or an improvement, or just trying to solve a solution that they already have. So up here, we're identifying the issue is we're finding the solution, but also it's the how we give them the knowledge to run with this and implement it themselves. So we would have the direct solutions, if you are putting a off-street parking area that's large, and those projects, stormwater detention, like on these new houses, costs a couple $1,000s. That's not expected on a driveway that costs a couple also $1,000. It's not equivalent. So how do you come up with direct solutions that are cost, really the cost is really thought out, and it's the ratio is equivalent to what they're actually improving there. Also, any of the projects the city might initiate or residents, needs to be communicated clearly, which are some of the priority projects and why the city would, which ones, just having a clear from that matrix, which will be discussed, which projects are priority and why that decision was made. And maintenance, communication channels with all of that to either help continue to identify problems that come up, or if there's something that we just need to just keep them in the loop on the solutions that they can do, the funding and the opportunities. And of course, updating the city on implemented projects. This one's important too, because we would love to have, after, if something did happen, let's say in your backyard that affected your neighborhood, the city in 3 years is not walking to your property to try to see it, because it's private. So we would hope that the residents maintain a taking pictures every year, sending the progress of how it's growing and going to the city on that one. Provides cost estimates for projects and solutions. So I mean, this is probably this is just supposed to be more holistic on a lot of the items that might be costed out and expected. So investigate travel patterns and drainage channels. Sometimes it's in-house, other times it's, you have an engineer to do a watershed drainage analysis. You might need to determine capacities by an engineer, a third-party engineer for, a bioswale that's going to take in water from two pipe disconnections. If we're going to do new pipes, you need to know how much that length of pipe's going to cost, and the construction for that, the design, our architects and engineer cost, and also the maintenance cost. Some of these things, a sewer in the ground might not cost all of that maintenance cost because it might turn into MSDs, but other things, if it's more of there might be other maintenance costs that might not be paid by the city, and that resident needs to know what they're getting themselves into if something were to be installed partially on their property. This establishes a matrix for project information and enactment. So we have just an A and B in here, and this has much room to expand, but for now it's identify management-based stormwater management based on factors related to the geographic location. So where would be everyone raised their hand and said, I have the issue. Well, based on a geographical location, the more standing out places and all of that would be the low points where all of the water in an area goes. So what's their properties, you might want to look at, or even prioritize, or just have a avenue thinking about these types of properties. So bordering the low points, bordering the streams. Right now, there's chapter 420, 422, 420 stream buffer protection regulations for those properties already, bordering some of the low points. So it already exists. The Board of Adjustments already ran into a few appeals about the stream buffer and building new houses. So this would, hopefully there would be an ordinance change that is more favorable to what's trying to be achieved without being so restrictive. At the same time, there'd be some priority in the matrix for those properties because they might be more impacted one way, either with a code change or with the code, or with just frankly more water. B is identify based on the drainage flow. So some properties might take in water from a street. I know on Dealman Road, there's an inlet that actually outflows into a backyard on crosswinds. So that's literally residential property taking in water from the streets, neighborhoods away. So those are the types of items, we could say, well, this does happen, but this area might take in a lot more water. Area inlet management points, a lot of properties have them, or some might only have one and it serves 40 houses. So that's a lot of water for that one particular property to take in. And finally, aligns projects to match funding sources. So it's not always about which property is the most impactful, because with only, money is scarce. So you must look at what are the other opportunities. So FEMA, SEMA, are there what are the federal funding opportunities? Right now I know they have stream federal flood insurance programs that all of that partakes in, but what else is out there in case they're handing out dollars to do something that was in all of that plan already. The watershed jurisdictions, Deer Creek, as Mr. Lewis mentioned earlier, those are different districts that may have funding, and they do have different rounds of bioretention type rainscaping grants available every year. So there are different jurisdictional boundaries to look at. And another one, hopefully MSD in the next while will have another rainscaping grant out there. So it's really looking at those 5 items that you see on the screen, or those 6 items, I'm sorry, that you see on the screen. With that, I'm open for any discussion from the commission at this point.
Anybody?
Jonathan, I
Jonathan,
think this really helps to begin to put our thoughts and our previous thoughts and discussions in some sort of order.
I concur. I think it's a good start. And I think as you go through it more, it'll start really defining itself. I think it's good, definitely a good start.
I want to add one thing. Jonathan, when you talked about putting information on our website, I was thinking about one of the ideas that you had presented to us early on about creating some kind of a guide for residents about how to deal with stormwater issues. Are you still thinking about that idea? Are you thinking about doing that online only, or what? How is that? What are you thinking about with regards to that?
Yeah, I'm thinking that most of this would be online just due to the complexity with a lot of the zooming in and out of a map and the electronic information there. It would be able to be printed. So if someone wanted to zoom in with different layers, they could print that out if they wanted to. That sort of falls under provide information online for public use, direct solutions for common residential activities. So it kind of falls hopefully under there without being so expanded, but I can definitely just highlight. Whoops. Definitely have that one into more thought for that one.
Okay.
Could I ask a question, Chairman? Just for clarification, what's private use? Who's the private use? Maintain a stormwater maintenance resource for public and private use. I understand the citizens and or the public, and I would even consider construction or builders to be public. Just who's private?
I'm going to change that to staff internal. I'm sorry. That was more just there's the public side of things and there's the private side that may not be so for example, different sewers and stuff like that just can't be given out publicly because of governmental reasons like terrorism, basically. So there might be some items that are just internal. So I'm going to change it.
Maybe the word should be internal. There you go. Like minds. Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I think we should kind of keep moving on if you guys don't mind.
Please fix that private up in your bold area as well to internal. Thank you. I'm so sorry, but I'm being my mother tonight.
We all need that. All right, let's move on to other business. Meeting minutes. I don't believe we have any meeting minutes for item A.
No, Chairman, my apologies with the holidays. We didn't have any drafted up and set for distribution.
No worries. Let's go right on to, I was going to go on to reports, but before we do that, maybe we should just check to see if we have any public comments.
Right. I still have one attendee online. I don't know if there are any comments that they can raise their hand and I can transfer them over. All right, Chairman, being none, you're set.
Okay, let's go on to reports. Carlos, let's go with yours.
Bear with me 1 second here. All right, just a couple of items. Again, we're still under COVID-19 regulations in the City Hall facilities. Community Center, Public Works, and the City Center are limited to access until further notice. We do know that the dine-in restaurant ban has been lifted with subject to some limitations. So several of our restaurants are back up and operating for dining use. I would like to note that that Tai Chi Shabu Shabu has opened. They're located in the Olivet Center. They relocated from their university facility right behind McKnight and Olive to here to Olivet. So it's been really neat to work with them, and they were excited to open up here. So we
Great.
had an opportunity. That's where the old it's been a while. I can't remember the previous tenant what that was there. Lulu's was in place. Regarding projects, the Oliver continues to move along. It's always neat to see the footings, and the footings are starting to rise in the ground as they've been doing the pour for the apartment aspect of it. So it's a pretty neat footprint, especially when you see it from an aerial perspective, as that has come about. It's also good to look at it, and I always welcome your comments or views regarding to now that we have a third dimension with that parking structure there. Whether our standards, how well or are effective are our standards, and they're working well. I think the setback has been good. I think the masses are pretty low so far, and there have been. I also respect concerns of the adjacent property owners because there is a change in the process, but I think our regulations do well to try to accommodate and mediate those changes. And of course, there will be landscaping that will be applied as this project comes more towards fruition. Regarding Easy Storage and the Plant Haven Commercial Center, I didn't reach out to them during the holidays, but they're still, last we talked, they're still committed to their projects. COVID's just kind of been a slowing factor in the process, and both of them are kind of, they have retail components, which even further complicate the process, but they're still looking to go. We have a meeting with Firestone next week regarding schedule. I think they're getting ready to start to move in their process, and we're excited for that project to get going. Regarding Olivet Center, they did approach the council to request an amendment to their TIF, which requires a TIF commission meeting, and they are working with the council on getting that scheduled and set. As dates become available, we'll share those with the commission. We will have, or I will talk to the city attorney. I anticipated him for one of the second or third meeting with the commission, because there are also some issues that he's been requested by the council to discuss to the commission regarding accessory structures. And again, it's all about how that process goes. There was appeal before the Board of Adjustment. After the decision was made by the Board of Adjustment, the Board of Zoning Adjustment made a recommendation, forwarded a recommendation to the City Council to consider some items regarding accessory structures in terms of some of the parameters or non-enumerated structures to be identified, such as, like, let's say, like a flagpole or a light pole, that they should be identified and authorized without a resident having to go through a prolonged permitting process. Also, in regards to some of the some of the existing code language as it goes through site plan review needs to be reassessed. So he will be, the council has asked the city attorney to prepare some draft language to address those two issues, and those will be brought to the commission. And if they're ready by the end of this month, I would invite the city attorney to join us and kind of talk about that. And that's just giving you a quick synopsis of that whole thing. We do have to have, and I know we're getting later in the day, discussion. We're going to be receiving a couple of new single-family permits for construction that are will be like the first homes to be constructed within a subdivision that hasn't seen any activity. We will be having that on Hillendale. We'll be having that on Pricemont, and we anticipate a couple of more streets. And it's always interesting because they set the tone for future. And again, as we're finding a lot of these lots, not every lot's ideal in size, but they're putting quite a bit of home on some of these properties. And while reasonable and more modern and meeting the needs of what the market is looking for today, we have to be a little bit more considerate about the neighborhood character. I think the guidelines provide good guidance on there, but I think that first home really needs to be carefully assessed by the commission. Staff will do so on your part too. And then stormwater, because it doesn't matter whether an existing subdivision that's had improvements or this is the first one. Stormwater is just a tough issue to try to mediate for all sorts of reasons, because there's all sorts of contributors. There's all sorts of existing environments, and then of course we kind of have our hands tied because we're working within an individual property when we see the problem as that goes beyond just those boundaries that we can work with. So Jonathan and I have kind of been talking of how best to approach some of these issues where, again, our role is not to design these developments for the developers, but to guide them saying what our concerns are and what we're going to bring to the commission, and that they need to come up with some solutions or options for consideration. And that is the goal to try to do, but we also don't want, these prolonged meeting discussions. So we'll assess how we present some of our data. There's no need to go through a full presentation of describing, the lot, on certain aspects of it, try to minimize that or provide it in your report and really focus the discussion and the meeting on those main issues, which are, of course, that neighborhood character and stormwater. And again, we'll be kind of giving the heads up to these developers, they need to be prepared, that there's expectations of answers to the questions or the concerns that are brought up, or that options are going to be made available for consideration. Welcome any comments on that, but we're trying to get them set because, of course, we're trying to mediate the subdivisions that always have the concerns, but also, we have standards and regulations, and we're also limited to those and what we can enforce and how that process works, and for everybody really to focus really on the specific issues. We're not here to manage, paints, colors, that the subdivision likes, but we're looking at masses, voids, materials, and things of that nature. And that, if they're going to have concerns, to really for themselves to look at the guidelines too, and kind of focus on those. That also helps the developer to better understand, what specifically is being asked upon them too. So just a heads up, it's been a while since we've had, an influx that's coming in of new construction in an older subdivision that hasn't seen that activity yet. And finally, from the building side, we've implemented new permitting software. So it's been a real fun week as we see it, kind of see how all the hiccups are in there as we're trying to get it to work the way we want. But for the most part, the the inspectors have been pretty patient and entering data. So it's kind of neat because it's, it's a learning curve for them. I know they get frustrated, but they're actually making a difference in how that back portion of the process works, so it can be reflective, or finding ways that it could be done in a different way, as opposed to just we've done it this way, so therefore we should always do it that way. So, but overall, we're keeping up the pace and we're not holding up any permits. But we did implement a new software, which will give us some better control, better information for residents of the progress and the status of their permits, and ultimately provide opportunities to streamline and make more of our process electronic as opposed to face-to-face interactions only. And that's all I have, Mr. Roper. If you have anything in addition.
No, I think you covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Carlos. Let's go to Missy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Trejo has said, it's been a very large year of learning curves for everybody. And grateful that we have the ability and the skills to do what you're doing electronically and in the ways that you're doing it. I don't really have much more to add other than we're in 2021. I can't believe we're in 2021, but things have been very good to the city in 2020, and sounds like they could be just as good in 2021. I'm excited that you guys are going to continue to be busy. Mr. Brophy, thank you once again for your ability to help in language and move this process along, and working with Mr. Trejo. You all bring up some very good thoughts and ideas every time. I want to wish everyone a happy, healthy new year. We do have an election coming on. 2 people are running for the position of 1 seat. You'll be getting your all of it newsletters. Keep in touch. And if you got any questions, don't ever hesitate to give any council member a call or the city staff. Thank you all again. Happy, healthy. That's
All
it.
right. Anybody else have any comments that they want to make? Seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting at 9:08. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you all.
Good night,
Good night.
everybody. Take care.